Yeah.
Hi, Mustafa.
So both of us will share our own slides, Mustafa and I.
The webinar live. We're just waiting for a few attendees to join in, and you can then start. I will give you an indication to start. Okay, we've got about 15 attendees. So Tulani or Mustafa, over to you. I'm not sure who I must hand over to.
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here to moderate this session. Sorry, I had a bit of a few challenges. Connection, electricity, and whatnot. So I think that's one of the. It's interesting that may be one of the issues that we know is going to focus on ICT before we start. Also, maybe an introduction for tax and governance. And we take us to the session, the Director of Research at ATAF, Nara Monkam, and the Senior Advisor to the Executive Secretary of ATAF, Varsha Singh. And this session will be focused on mainly the use of ICT for revenue administration. We've seen what the pandemic has done over the past 1 year or 2 years. And we've seen how revenue administration have been able to adapt using ICT during the lockdowns, how African revenue authorities responded in terms of e-filing. Some African revenue authorities already had some of these systems in place. They were able to leverage, and we also saw how some revenue administrations were also able to beef up their systems just to accommodate. In the interest of ensuring that African countries are able to harness the opportunities and the potential that ICT offers to revenue administration, the ATAF came up with a handbook which was published in June earlier this year. And like I mentioned, we have two able panelists that will be taking us through this. We'll start with Dr. Nara Monkam. Each panelist has 20 minutes to present, after which we'll go for Q&A for 15 minutes, and so we'll be very strict with time. I think we're doing well with time as it is, so we'll be very strict with time. So Dr. Nara Monkam, over to you.
Nara, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, so very much, Mustafa, for chairing this session, and good afternoon to everyone. So it is my pleasure to present to you some of the key results, the key content of a 2-year project that we conducted on ICT. Basically, the objective was to trying to assess, evaluate all the challenges that African tax administrations are facing in ICT, as well as developing a model framework to assess, to help them assess the implementation, maintenance, and as well as acquisition of ICTs in the respective countries. So this is mainly let me just take here. This is the outline. So we'll talk about what are the key components of the guidebook, as well as some of the results emanating from the government survey that we conducted. And I will also present to you the capability model, or the maturity model that we developed based on all the good practices, as well as guidance from ICT directors in our African tax administration. And I will also present some of how basically the tax administration can use these tools in their countries. So basically, this is the main book. It's currently available on the website. In terms of the structure of the guidebook, so as I mentioned, so we first assess basically the ICT tax landscape in Africa through a literature review, but also through conducting Africa-wide government survey. Then the book also includes what we call the ICT capability or maturity model that we developed that provide the framework that the tax administration can use to actually determine the maturity level of their countries. And then, of course, we also develop an assessment to a self-assessment tool to allow countries to do that. And of course, we also conducted a survey of good practices and success stories or innovation in ICT in our countries that we also present. And of course, we ended with some recommendations. And I just want to let you know that all of these, even the presentation, will be available to you in English, French, and Portuguese. So not to worry there, and all the books are currently available on the website. So in terms of the main results that we saw from the ICT survey, so first, why did we focus on this study? First, it's because of all the challenges that, of course, our membership faced in ICT tax system, telling us that they spend an enormous amount of money on ICT tax systems that not always respond to their needs. So sometimes they have to let it go and then revert to manual systems. Issues of skills as well as technology, so which we presented earlier. So that's why we embarked on this project. So we first start by establishing the landscape, where we made an inventory of all the ICT challenges that we see, but also an inventory of the success stories of the innovation that the countries have already implemented. Also, we collected ideas of good, like I say, good practices, but also all the future, the innovation, the planning for innovation that the countries had in mind. And also, we have to know that this project was highly participatory. We involved the ICT directors of approximately 27 African countries. And then we had a technical committee that basically guided us throughout this project. So in terms of the main sources, the main steps that we implemented, basically we started with that DEX research. We conducted consultative meetings, like I said, with 36 countries, including ICT and business experts across Africa. And the questionnaires was administered across 32 African countries. And of course, we also have in-depth focus group discussion with 7 countries, from including countries that were quite advanced and quite in the middle, but also not quite so advanced in terms of ICT, in their ICT journey. So here are some of the automated functions in revenue administration that we saw. I won't spend too much time here. And here are some of the key challenges that the tax administration told us that they face in terms of in the area of acquisition, implementation, and maintenance. So infrastructure limitation that basically you can see in terms of acquisition, in the acquisition, implementation, and maintenance phase. Low data quality issues in the implementation and maintenance phase. Low staff capacity in all phases of the implementation of the ICT. The absence of political and policy and political will. But one key issue that the tax administration basically raised was the lack of source code ownership and the absence of transfer of skills when outsourcing ICT solution and signing contract with those service providers, which basically create huge challenges in terms of capacity and meaning skills and high maintenance costs. So that's the ICT landscape. The challenges that the countries told us that they face. But we also assess, from the countries, we also saw that there are negative factors and positive factors, obviously, affecting the efficiency of the role of ICT within our tax administration. So whether you have a positive environment or a negative environment, ICT will either have positive or not so positive effects, or quite slow in terms of the role they can play. In terms of, for example, negative aspect of the environment that affect the efficiency of ICT, we have the fact that, for example, it takes between 6 to 12 months to procure ICT products. We have the fact that there still remains huge challenges in terms of power and electricity, the uncertainty around regulatory bodies. It's also in support of the implementation of ICT in tax administration is also a big issue. In terms of positive factors that are affecting the effectiveness of ICT in tax administration, we can name the fact that we have national laws to direct the acquisition of ICT, so that helps quite a lot. The fact that we have national guidelines on ICT, as well as a national ICT legal regime, just to name a few. So from there, from the literature review, from the government survey, and from that engagement, a multiple engagement with the ICT directors from 36 African countries, we came up with an ICT capability or maturity level, basically a framework that is assisting African countries to assess the maturity level of the ICT tax system. And that framework, that model, basically relies on 7 capability blocks, including governance and policy, cost and contract management, project management, stakeholder and change management, business process management. Technology is key as well, and as well as, of course, the sustainability of ICT. So those are the 7 pillars of the reference model or the capability model that African countries can use to assess themselves, to assess the maturity of the systems. So those, for each of those maturity block, we discussed the what, we discussed the who, and then we discussed the how. Just an example here, in terms of the governance and policy capability model, the what will be the ICT governance framework, the administrative and management structure. The who will be the parent ministry, the policymakers, the board of directors. The how will be interagency collaboration, policies and procedures. And then, of course, we'll have the results there. So like I said, for the sake of time, I'll just skipping this, but you will have access to it, like I said, in PowerPoint presentation in your respective language. So from there, from the capability, the framework maturity model, we developed the ICT capability or maturity assessment tools, basically an assessment tool that tax administration then can use to determine the maturity level or the level of development of the ICT function in the tax administration. So here, for example, is the assessment of the maturity level of the block, the pillar technology, where basically the score, we determine the score of that, or the maturity level of that capability group by comparing, by basically determining where that score lies, whether between the lower scores, the lowest scores, what we call, or the medium score, or the highest score. So depending on what the technology score is, so it can be either very good, good, average, or poor in terms of maturity level or capability level. So here, for example, is the calculation of the assessment of the maturity level of technology in country B, C, and D. And but of course, this is important to note at this level that we are currently in the process of automating this self-assessment tool, so that countries can then use this self-assessment tool to determine the maturity level of each of their 7 pillars, but also the overall capability or maturity of the overall ICT tax systems in their respective countries. So this will be available by the end of this year. So in terms of application, how much time do I have left, Mustafa?
We have 7 more minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. So in terms of application, so first, we strongly recommend that all the tax administration use this model because it's the first of its kind, obviously, in our continent, and it's a model that has been developed, like I said, in partnership with 36 African countries in close collaboration with ICT directors and ICT units. So we strongly recommend that the tax administration adopt this model whenever they are ready to acquire, implement, or maintain the system. So we strongly encourage them to implement the recommendation. And of course, soon, like I said, we're going to make that self-assessment tool available to the tax administration, where they can go online and click and tick and immediately a country performance report, an ICT performance report will be produced to them, so that they can see what is the maturity level of each of the 7. A key pillar of an ICT maturity process, but also the overall ICT, the health of the overall ICT performance, ICT tax system in their countries. So we will provide that link, that automated tool very soon. And also we actually, in the medium to long term, we're planning to say, almost like the TADAT system. We actually call our self-assessment tool the IDAT system, the ICT Diagnostic Assessment Tool. We also planning in the medium to long term to say that we need to develop a team of assessors across the continent, ICT assessors, which team therefore can then be sent to each of those countries. If you don't want to self-assess yourself and you want to have an independent assessment of your ICT system, then ATAF can deploy that team of ICT assessors in your countries to help you independently assess the maturity level of your tax system and identify what are your areas of needs and reforms in the country. So that's the next phase of this project. And of course, through your continuous feedback, we're going to continuously improve those tools. And the last block here is the training and technical assistance. So now that we have those tools, after you continuously engage with those tools, the tax administration do so, then we can use those tools for training and technical assistance. So some of those key recommendations, I will just skip to it quickly. Sorry, we're hearing the interpreters. So in terms of ICT, I just also raise your attention to the fact that next to the ICT guidebook, we also have what we call the checklist. Basically, it's a summarized version of all the steps that you need to follow in terms of assess when you acquire, implement, and maintain your ICT system. So it's a very short checklist of the things to do in order to have an efficient ICT system in your countries. But we also have a book on the success stories, which basically provide innovative and success stories compiled in 18 tax administration and 2 regional bodies, and it presents 25 ICT innovation and success stories. So I strongly encourage you also not to reinvent the wheel, but then to refer to this book to see what are the things that others have done, and the things that have been successful and the things that have failed, basically, to help you in your ICT process. Some of the key lessons that we learned from this from this 2-year project is, first of all, the importance of infrastructure. We need to be able to leverage emerging technologies. Support is key. If we are not able to mobilize and the political and executive sponsorship, is going to be quite difficult to implement an efficient ICT system. Contracting, that's paramount, because that's where the issue of source coding and as well as data ownership and transfer of skills come into play. So it's absolutely important that countries, when they negotiate with service provider, negotiate strongly around those 3 points, so that they have that measure of ownership on the source coding, and making sure there's transfer of skills. Collaboration is key to build synergies and to make sure, like I said, we do not reinvent the wheel, and of course, capacity, building the systems and the required staff to implement what we want. So in a few slides left, I just wanted to present some of the the country success stories. And again, I encourage you to get the book where you can have the details of those success stories, so that again, you know what worked elsewhere and you do not waste time reinventing the wheel. You just learn what has been done and then customize it to your circumstances. For example, in Angola, the integrated tax management system, the enhancement payment gateway in Kenya, in Madagascar, the mobile payment system. In Mali, for example, interestingly, I think where is this Zambia case? There's also the Zambia case who completely developed the entire system in partnership with universities. So they decided not to go the route of external service provider, but developed in partnership with universities. So this is a bit a brief overview of some of the success stories out there. We also had success stories from COMESA with the EAC, with a single custom territory, and the COMESA digital free trade area. So good things that we can also, from which we can learn from. So basically, that's been the key things that we wanted to present to you. We want to, again, to strongly encourage you to access those books. We will continue organizing technical webinars around these tools to make sure that there's appropriation and ownership at the country level, but also making sure that they make use of that, what do I call, the self-assessment tool to assess where they are in their ICT journey. And we're planning to redo the study again, because now we have a baseline. We're planning to replicate the study again in 2 to 3 years, because we have to, as you know, technological advancement are quite fast. So we're planning to replicate it, and of course we invite policymakers to work in partnership with the tax administration, the partner ministry, the legislator, and the ICT actors to continuously improve ICT systems in their countries. So Mustafa, that's what I had to say today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for being very good with time. And I'm sure, like you mentioned, African revenue administrations and the participants of this session will have already seen the value that this ICT guidebook has, and I'm sure you all next presentation, Varsha.
So Mustafa, should I continue?
Yes, please, go ahead.
We may have lost Mustafa. I'm not sure if he's having problems with his connection, but I will then continue with the second presentation, which builds on what Nara has just presented on the ICT guidebook that ATAF has developed. In the last few days, we've heard, over the last 2 days, we've heard from tax administrations sharing with us case studies on the journeys that they have taken in the development of their IT tax systems. And as Nara has said, there are many case studies in the ICT guidebook, which also provides other case studies from the continent. We've also heard about different types of technology and like blockchain as well in the last 2 days, and the importance that data is playing for tax administrations of the future. So with this and taking this forward, ATAF, the ATAF Council and General Assembly, the Commissioner Generals, has requested ATAF to work on the feasibility of an ICT tax administration system for Africa. So I will share with you a little today on what was some of the thinking behind this, where we are with the inception phase, what we have, what we are looking forward to in terms of the feasibility, and also the next steps. So I think we've all agreed that, the digital revolution holds the potential and challenges for developing countries in relation to tax collection. The digital technology can reshape the way tax administrators collect, process, and act on information, and helps them to be more efficient, effective, and transparent in the process of developing a trust between the taxpayers and the state. The aid of technology is really important in this process, as it can greatly increase compliance and reduce tax evasion, decrease administrative burdens, and it can foster business growth. This we've seen has come to the fore during COVID, with many tax administrations that had in place technology that were able to very quickly adapt their working environment with the taxpayers. So in looking at the tax administration system and how we would build this, some of the objectives that we have looked at is to support tax administrations in the modernization process. And firstly, it is all towards domestic resource mobilization. And it's to support and to make tax administrations more effective. It's not just about simplification, but it's about efficiency. Facilitating assessments using technology and automation to reduce transaction times and costs, and promoting sustainable development by enhancing tax administration's capability around the use of electronic transactions. We've also heard, I think yesterday, about data and the role data will be playing. So this project would also look at the role the data plays for tax administrations in the future, where it's coming from, how do they use it, and how is it used in the processes for tax administrations in building their compliance. So as part of this project life cycle, we have developed a high-level life cycle, which is looking at a roadmap in terms of how we prepare for this project. The first part was to do an inception phase. And in the inception phase, all of what Nara has presented, the data that the team collected for the ICT Guidebook has been used as the first building block for this project. So that data was used to do an analysis of the current state for whether we should move forward in the feasibility for an IT tax system for Africa. It was also used to develop what the terms of reference would look like, and also as part of the feasibility for us to be able to go and look at what is out there in terms of doing a market assessment. Very important in this is governance, and the project will has and will continue to require a governance model to be defined and formalized with our members. The framework will serve the project not only during the feasibility and during the inception that we've just done, but also by guiding the required decisions that we would need for the project delivery. This will include the establishment of a reference group at a Commissioner General level to serve as a steering group for the project. The steering group would also be supplemented by working groups made up of ICT heads and specialists from our member countries. In terms of mobilization, the stream will highlight the needs for an internal ATAF resource support structure to enable the project to succeed, and this would include project management structure that would be put in place to take the project forward. So, as Nara has indicated, and I won't I won't go too much into that. We have looked at what is out there, the case studies, the quality of data, some of the challenges that have been experienced by members in tax administrations, what were some of the costs and the access that they have to software solutions, and what we intend to do will be to overcome some of these challenges that our tax administrations are facing. And I think it's also important to note that from our 40 members, we have members that are at different stages of development. So what will work for one may not work for the other. And in developing the IT tax system, we have to take that into consideration. When you look at, developing a tax administration system and how you automate it, as part of modernization and transformation processes, and that is what is being depicted in this slide, is we need to look at what are the different activities in the process, and we need to take the processes and we need to look at how we would automate that and how we will prioritize it. So this picture here, this model shows some of the sequencing that needs to happen, and how do you do this in terms of offering a service to your taxpayer, such as electronic filing of returns or electronic payments. And you can then look at it in terms of high visibility and what should be taken up first. So each process in a tax administration could go through this model in terms of the prioritization that tax administrations need to take. So in doing this, we also then expanded on the framework that Nara indicated in the ICT Guidebook, and what are the things that tax administrations need to develop. So we have, as depicted here, derived the capabilities and the functions that need to be managed and performed and delivered by revenue administrations. We have also looked at several complementary functions and capabilities that enable tax administrations to function effectively. So this is the model that we came up with in the inception phase, and which we will take further in the feasibility. So some of the areas is, and when you talk about IT and technology, it should fit into your strategy of the organization. So developing an ICT strategy shouldn't be a standalone. It should be part of the overall strategy and the strategy management by the administration. So that is an important capability that needs to be looked at. The next one is looking at organizational management, because when you need to implement a strategy, it needs to correspond to the organizational structure, the key performance objectives, as well as what support structures do you have for the administration to be able to maintain this system. And again, importantly, it's not just about technology, because technology is an enabler of the processes. So if a tax administration changes their process, those things need to be changed, and this needs to fit into the organizational structure. The next one is looking at things like entity management, understanding your registration and managing your tax base. Another is channel management, and tax administrations deal with various channels, and how would that be segmented, and how would you engage with this, and how would you prioritize? Rule management is important, and as we know, as tax administrators, each year that changes in terms of from a national perspective, and that has to be built into the system. The submission and processing is a key engine room where all submissions are reviewed and critiqued and processed, and also where the accrual of tax collection is performed, and this needs to be maintained and developed all the time. And then we look at risk management, and then things like dispute management, which we've put in here. Risk management links in with data, and how do we get that data in, how we would use it as part of a risk engine, and in building the compliance culture, and also how we would deal with those that are not compliant. So these are some of the important areas that we have taken into account in developing the framework. Other areas that we have also looked at is to make sure that this would be an integrated tax administration system, because as Nara has indicated from the work that they did in the development of the ICT Guidebook, that there are systems that are not integrated, that are segregated, and we need to be able to address that. And this will be a key capability for the scope of the tax administration system, and how we aim to address all of the capabilities. So the answer to all of this lies in the requirements that we need for our members, and therefore the members are very important in the analysis phase of the feasibility. If you look here, and we have looked at we've taken this framework further, and we have divided it into what are the primary functions and what are the secondary functions for tax administrations. So this can be defined as, the primary can be defined as those that are core to handling the processing of taxes. It is, in other words, the operational focus and the capability of the administration. And the secondary are those capabilities that enable the administration to support and deliver the primary functions effectively. So also, when you're looking at a technology journey, you need to look at, in terms of your roadmap, where do I start? What are some of the first things that I need to do, and what can come thereafter? And it has to be linked very importantly to the legislation of the tax administration as well. We also then looked at how can this solution be developed, and because most of our members have some sort of system currently. So what we are looking at, how do we do this in a modular, as a modular basis, and how we will roll this out and interact and engage with it in the current systems of our tax administrations. So if you look here, there are a number of components in this figure, which illustrates the capabilities that could be delivered as separate components, or as it can also be done as a end-to-end tax administration system. There is also the need to make sure that if you are looking at tax administrations today, may have other payments solutions, for example, that they are using and they have invested a lot in. So this solution that we're looking at has to be able to talk to what we roll out. So these are some of the things that we will unpack further as part of the feasibility study. So in the feasibility study, we will be looking at these components. And the first would be looking at what is the legal legislation that exists, and what are some of the restrictions across the member states. And we will then look at what is it that we can bring forward in terms of implementing something practically. So the other areas would be is to look at the technical feasibility, to do an analysis of the technical ability to implement the solution within the intended environment, and it is based on technical requirements of various stakeholders. So when developing, again, a technology, it's not just looking internal to the stakeholders, but also looking external. And again, as Nara has indicated, infrastructure, for example, is one of the challenges that was highlighted in the study that they did. And so that is sometimes not in the hands of the tax administration because they have to deal with various players in the country. So those engagements need to take place, and you need to have a good stakeholder engagement strategy to be able to ensure that what you put on the table is easily implemented. Also looking at the operational feasibility, analyzing the ability of the different members, administrations will be key for us, and utilizing the current resources and capabilities that exist. This will also look at operating models and whether they are conducive to implementing and managing and operating a tax administration system. The next would be scheduling the feasibility. Tied to the operational and the technical feasibility, this analyzes the time it would take to design, develop, and implement the system. Considering the rapid innovations that takes place from a technology perspective, we would need to look at the ever-changing environments of our member states. And this implies that we would have to consider future-proofing this design and building in a learning and continuous improvement model in the management of the system. The last area that is here is economic feasibility. And again, considering the cost that will be required to deliver, we would need to make sure that the cost-benefit analysis of the solution options will determine the economic viability for ATAF and its members, as well as the potential investors into the system. The cost to design and to develop and implement the solution would be closely linked with the practical outcomes of the other elements of the feasibility study. In all of this, we will also constantly be looking at what is the problem statement, as well as the requirements and the gathering phase in terms of what needs to be developed and delivered to the members. Lastly, there would be a market assessment as part of the feasibility done. So to look at what is out there, but not just what is out there in the market, but also what is out there that our members are currently using. And maybe we could take that and build further on it or leverage on it. So these are the things that we would look at in the market assessment. This project is a 2 to 3 year project. So we're hoping that we will start the feasibility in 2022. And thereafter, we will then be able to go into whether the decision of whether we will build or we would, leverage on another system out there for the IT taxes administration system for Africa. So some of the next steps includes developing a project office for ATAF, looking at the funding sourcing, looking at governance model, and then to look at the feasibility will lastly inform the council on the decision that we need to take for the development of the system. So this project is only just finished its inception. We will be informing our members as we go, but also we will be building on what currently exists and not reinventing the wheel. I think that's very important to note. Thank you, Mustafa. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Basha. I mean, like I said, we're fortunate to make these very important presentations, and we can see the value this offers and what ATAF is offering participating member countries. I've not seen any question in the Q&A and also in the chat, so maybe I will ask my own questions, right? So, and first I'd like to ask Nara. I mean, so this survey, like you mentioned, was carried across about 30 member countries, right? So, I mean, from what you presented, there are a lot of challenges and some advantages. I just want to, what is the common challenge that you found across these countries, or the majority of the countries?
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for your question. Audrey, actually, it was interesting to see, first of all, how the challenges varied a bit from the different regions and also across Anglophone, Francophone, or Lusophone countries. But in terms of the common challenges that came forward was the issue of, first of all, source coding. Because the tax administration said that for many countries, Mustafa, they received the technical assistance from development partners who basically came and brought external people to implement systems that they ended up not using. So that was one issue as well. And the second issue was that when they were themselves involved in the acquisition of ICT system, that most of the time they felt that they find themselves locked in contracts that were not beneficial for them, where, first of all, they did not own the source code. And for any tiny changes that they needed to then refer to the service provider, and which will cost them millions just for a tiny change in the system. And that the fact that the service provider, when they came to implement, they did not transfer the skills. So the tax administration find themselves completely dependent on not only the skills of the service provider, but also the enormous cost of maintenance. So that was, some of the main the issues around ICT. So that's why some of the time they start beautifully a project and they invest millions, but they end up putting that system aside and wasting money because they can't continue. There's no more money to continue, and now they have to revert back to their old system. So that's why they mentioned that the fact that they start and they one step forward, two steps back, basically. And of course, all those issues around the political support, a lot of corruption, unfortunately, also around when it's time to acquire ICT system, lots of corruption around there, a lack of political support. And the fact that also then when some tax administration said, yes, we are making progress in our ICT journey. The fact that is that the ICT journey is not undertaken by the rest of the government as well. So they don't have a government-wide kind of strategy, so that the tax administration finds itself a bit isolated compared to the rest of the governments, especially when they want to have that interfacing between the Ministry of Finance, with the customs, with the home, the Ministry of Interior to have, the database of, widen the database. So those are kind of the issues that they mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very good answer. I think what I get is that we should understand that context matters, right? Context matters, and it's a critical success factor for effective implementation. And then secondly, when we're implementing ICT systems, we cannot do it in isolation of other government areas. We need to think about the external stakeholders as well. So it's not just something. So let me see, I think we have a question. So no, this from Lamin Khalifa at Gmail. I think this is more of a comment about the BEPS project. The other question is from Dr. Amna Khalifa. Will the risk assessment also be available for countries outside of Africa? So maybe Varsha, you could take this.
Thank you. So in terms of what we are developing, and it is geared to our members firstly for ATAF, and but of course, once we have something in place, if another tax administration would like to, for example, like the module on risk management, it will be available to them. So yes, it will be available, and but the governance, as you indicated, all of that has to be worked out. And but firstly, it will be available to our members. But I think just to also maybe add to what Nara was saying about, systems and some of the challenges that our members are having, a lot of them because there is there's an area that they need to plug they go out and they buy an off-the-shelf package that does not link in with their legacy systems. And what we are trying to do with the IT tax administration system that we are looking at for Africa is to build something that will not mean that they have to throw away the legacy systems, because a lot of tax administrations have invested a lot in legacy systems, but how can you take that and how can you then leverage off the new areas that you need to bring in, especially, for example, risk management, which many of them may not have. We also need to bear in mind that, you know, when developing something for the continent, we have to take into consideration the very different infrastructure that exists across the continent. And that's what we develop is easily implemented in all of them. And therefore, from what I said right at the beginning, is really important that the development of an IT or technology in tax administration systems, in tax administrations, needs to be part of the broader strategy of tax administrations. It cannot be seen as a standalone. And again, just looking at risk management, that again has to be taken into account with the evolution that is happening in the global tax space, and especially with all of the data that is becoming available, how we would use that in the current processes and tax administrations. Thank you.
Can I also add quickly something, Mustafa, in terms of the self-assessment, the tool that we're implementing by the end of the year, which is basically the self-assessment of the maturity level of ICT within countries. So for us, we would link that self-assessment tool with our ATAF data bank, where all the countries, we will give them a possibility to have access to that, to self-assess themselves. And then that tool will allow them not only to benchmark across different regions, across the 7 capability groups that I mentioned, and also the overall score of the ICT system. We will make sure that those countries have access to that tool from our platform. But because our data bank includes countries that are beyond, that are not only ATAF membership, but also other African countries. So all countries will have access to that tool should they wish to have access to it. And that tool also will be able to, will cater for the fact that some of our tax administration are semi-autonomous revenue authorities, and others are still tax department within the Ministry of Finance. So whether and therefore the tax department as well as the custom will also be able to self-assess the maturity level of the ICT system. And from, like I said, the result will be automated in the report that will be immediately available after you click submit. So you have your country report immediately, and that country report, then you can share it with your decision maker to help you assess, benchmark, first of all, how do you fare compared to other countries in the region and in Africa? And also help you identify your needs, your ICT needs for further reform or training or technical assistance.
Thank you very much. I think another thing I just took away now is that because ordinarily you'd need professionals, consultants to do this sort of assessments. So what ATAF has done here is come up with a tool that will sort of assist countries assess this themselves. And I think that's very important. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to ask Varsha another question. I mean, there's a lot that has been presented today, even though did it within 40 minutes, but it seems like a lot. I mean, what do you see? I mean, from your feel from the continent, are we in a pessimistic situation, or is there a lot of optimism? How are you going to gauge that?
Yes, I think there is definitely from the there is optimism, and especially if I look at our engagements with our members and with the Commissioner Generals on the continent, this is something that they want ATAF to work on. And the reason is, I think, as what Nara has indicated as well in her presentation, every time, with the legacy systems, but also the source code, many of them, when they go out and buy a system, they do not own the source code. So the whole idea in developing the system is that we will own it as Africa. We will own the source code. Of course, as we have indicated, it's about also maintenance, which is the long term and is very important. So you have to build a team around it that would be able to maintain it in the future. But not just in terms of, I think, Mustafa, you used the word consultants. It's about looking at also when you're going to implement the system, and when we go out into to work with one of our members, it will be working with them in a broader context of implementing a technology. So it will be as part of a whole transformation project, not just going in and saying, okay, there's this piece of technology and now we're going to plug it in and it's going to address these needs that you have. But it's going to be looking at the legislation firstly, then looking at the processes, the policies that need to support it, and the people, which is also very important, and how we're going to make use of the people that, in the new processes that have been identified. And then the technology would come to enable that process. So I think there is optimism, and I think that it's just about how we are going to do it to make sure we address some of the challenges like the infrastructure, working with other stakeholders within governments on the continent, and each country is different, and some have more autonomy and others don't in terms of the infrastructure, but it's going to be how do you navigate those and enable to the technology to be able to bring about the efficiency and effectiveness.
Thank you very much for that very detailed response. So we are almost out of time. Any final comments, Dr. Nara, before we close?
Thank you very much, Mustafa. I just want to, again, for all the tax administration that are present in this parallel session, I just want to strongly encourage you. We have a tool now that has been developed by, in collaboration, close collaboration with the ICT directors of our tax administration themselves. We have spent 2 years trying to get a sense of the ICT landscape on our continent, get a sense of the challenges. And from all of that, and from that continuous participatory process, we came up with a model, a maturity or capability model that the countries can use in their day-to-day work to actually, help them, whether it's at the acquisition stage, whether it's at the implementation stage, whether it's at the maintenance stage, to basically give them points, a checklist of what to do and what not to do in the negotiation, in the conversation with the different stakeholders to really help them to avoid the pitfalls that we have seen in the past. So I strongly encourage them to use those tools, and then also make use of the self-assessment that we're going to announce by the end of this year. And then, of course, everything that is coming up out of that, developing a team of assessors and ICT to help one another. Also, so just want them to watch out for that space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Varsha. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm sure you've said all you wanted to say anyway. So thank you very much. Thank you both, Nara and Varsha. I mean, this is very, very, although I'm sure if we had more time, you'd go into more details, but like you mentioned, the book is available and the presentations will be shared across to the participants in their respective languages. We sincerely appreciate you for your time and for taking for going in for taking us through this. Thanks also for those in the background, Jane, everybody, Tilani, and everyone, and our participants. Thank you very much. This session has now come to a close. Bye.
Thank you, Mustafa, and thank you to everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Mustafa. Thanks all.
Bye.
So maybe just to the participants, when you log off from this breakout room, you will need to log out of the breakout room, enter the platform again, and then join the next session, which will start after the break. So you would have to log out completely from this breakout room and then go back to the platform and log into session 9. Thank you.